Welcome to the Horse Hour podcast. Today we're at the National Equine Forum and we're joined by Professor Sue Dyson, who's doing a talk on the rider weight study. How are you, Sue?
I'm in fine form, thank you.
Good. Now, I am so interested to hear your speech, your talk today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be discussing?
Well, it's been recognised for some time that the human population is getting bigger and bigger. And as a result of that, we are recognising that there are some problems with large riders riding horses that are potentially too small for themselves. And this was highlighted at the Great Yorkshire Show over the last couple of years when quite a high proportion of riders have been asked to dismount because their body weight was 20% or more of the horse's body weight. The industry as a whole lacks guidelines as to what is or is not an acceptable body weight or body size for any particular horse. And although there have been some studies performed previously which have looked at the total weight carried by a horse and its effect, most of those studies have focused entirely on increasing the weight by adding dead weight. So the horses have carried increasing amounts of lead in order to potentially simulate the effects of a heavier rider. However, that doesn't address the real situation with a rider who is a mobile rider, who may not necessarily be completely in balance with the horse, and who is therefore potentially more likely to have an adverse influence over the horse than merely the addition of dead weight, which is in a fixed position.
There's a lot of anomalies with this, though, isn't there? Because you could have, I'm guessing, like you're talking about the dead weight, a rider that might be heavier but is an exceptionally good rider that can actually sit the movement of the horse, yet somebody who's 8 stone who maybe can't and is banging on the horse's back. How do you counteract those anomalies?
Well, you can only take one step at a time. And our study purely focused on 4 riders of similar abilities but differing in body weights. We cannot possibly, in a single study, address all the potential issues that are there because there are many factors that are potentially influential, such as the length of the horse's back, the fitness of the horse, the pre-existence of any musculoskeletal problems, the balance of the rider, the fit of the saddle, both to the rider and to the horse, the height of the rider, the symmetry of the rider, whether or not they can sit straightly or crookedly. So there are many, many factors that need to be taken into account in the overall consideration of rider to horse sizes. And also you have to think about the work that the horse is going to be asked to do. It's very different for a horse hacking at a walk for an hour compared with a horse being ridden cross-country for half a day on an endurance ride, for example. So we can only, in our study, address a very finite area. And the finite area that we addressed was the effect of 4 riders of different body weights on 6 different horses. The 6 different horses were believed by their owners to be capable to be ridden consistently on the bit for a minimum of 30 minutes twice a day, so they were adequately fit. And we ran the study in a randomized order so that the horses were allocated in a completely randomized way to the different riders who were of different body weights but of similar ability. Now, they weren't all the same height. We had 4 riders, a lightweight, a moderate weight, a heavyweight, and a very heavyweight. And the heavy rider was considerably taller than the other riders. We didn't change the saddles between the different riders, so the rider's position in the saddle was very much influenced by not only the weight of the rider and their body dimensions in a widthwise fashion, but also in their height and how the height of the rider will influence their leg position and therefore their position on the saddle. But that's what happens in a real-life situation. So, for example, at a riding school, they don't change the saddle according to the rider. Likewise, with adults riding in showing ponies at shows, the adult rider gets on the same saddle that the child is going to ride on. So we are mimicking what happens in the real world.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's only recently I found out you can have saddles made to the shape of your body, which I think's incredible idea. It costs £3,000, and most of us can't afford that. So it would be amazing to have that. And so, what did you find?
Well, the horses each had to perform a 30-minute dressage type test, which included large portions of trot and canter. And the test was called so that the riders knew where they were going all the time. And we evaluated the horses' gaits by looking subjectively for the presence or absence of lameness, and also looking objectively with the use of inertial measurement units. And we also applied an ethogram, which is a descriptor of behaviour. And we have previously demonstrated with this ethogram, which has 24 different behaviours, that the presence of 8 or more of these behaviours is likely to reflect musculoskeletal pain.
Are these ethograms, are they connected to the facial studies that you did last year?
Yes, it's an extension of that work. So it's looking at the whole horse behaviour. So not just at the facial expression, but also, for example, becoming disunited in canter, or swishing the tail very vigorously, movement of the head up and down vigorously or continually. So it's a further development from the facial expression study.
Brilliant. So they had to display 8 of those signs.
Well, we know that 8 or more is likely to reflect musculoskeletal pain. And so, therefore, in devising our study, we said that if a horse developed a grade 3 out of 8 lameness or more, then we would terminate the test immediately. And with the behaviour markers, we gave them a little leeway. So we said if there were 10 or more behavioural markers, we would terminate the study. And all the tests with the heavy rider and all the tests with the very heavy rider were abandoned, either due to lameness or to the display of 10 or more behavioural markers.
Wow.
The majority of tests were abandoned due to the development of lameness. But one test was developed because in canter, the horse developed 10 behavioural markers with the heavy rider. And when we compared that to the results with the lightweight and moderate riders, we had one test out of 12 which was abandoned for the moderate rider due to lameness.
Yes.
And it's important to recognise that the lameness that developed was transient in nature. So the riders were stopped immediately that the horses showed this lameness, and then they were re-evaluated trotting in hand approximately 45 minutes later, and all of those horses trotted normally. All of those horses subsequently went on to perform very satisfactorily under the light and the moderate riders without showing lameness or a disproportionate number of behavioural signs. So the effects of the heavy and the very heavy riders were transient, but substantial. We also acquired video recordings of the horses during set pieces of the test so that I could go back retrospectively and apply the ethogram for all of the horses using the video recordings and compare the scores for each of the riders. And although none of the scores exceeded the cutoff of 8 in the first trot phases, there were significant differences in the total behaviour scores between the light and moderate compared with the heavy rider, and with the light and moderate compared with the very heavy rider, and also significant differences between the heavy rider and the very heavy rider. So once again, showing that there were behavioural modifications, probably reflecting some degree of discomfort with the heavy and the very heavy riders. Interestingly, of the 6 horses, one of the normal riders of the 6 horses was of similar weight to our heavy rider. So they were 91 and 92 kilograms respectively. However, the normal rider was substantially shorter than our heavy rider, and that influences position in the saddle. I saw, when we selected the horses, the normal rider ride the horse and it looked fine. So it was not just an effect of body weight per se, it was the effect of the rider's size and their position in the saddle, because in the owner's saddle, our heavy rider was sitting right on the back of the saddle, it therefore influencing the distribution of forces under the saddle, which we think is influential. It was also interesting that we looked at the rider's body mass index, and the body mass index is used in the health profession to look at being overweight or obese, and it's calculated by looking at the weight of somebody divided by their height squared. And based on this, both the moderate rider and the heavy rider were overweight, but there were substantially more tests abandoned for the heavy rider, indicating that it's probably not an effect of body mass index, it is an effect actually of the rider weight.
And so the horses that you used, did you see a huge amount of difference between the different breeds and, you know, how stocky or how heavy a horse was?
Well, we particularly chose horses that were between 500 and 600 kilograms body weight, so that we had a rider-to-horse body weight ratio of between 10 and 12% for the lightweight rider, more than 12 but less than 15% for the moderate rider, more than 15% but less than 18% for the heavy rider, and more than 20% for the very heavy rider. So because they were all between 500 and 600 kilograms, they were all of reasonably similar size, but they weren't all the same breed, and we couldn't assess the effect of breed. Now, anecdotally, people have talked about, well, breeds with a lot of bone are better weight carriers. Well, we had one horse which had a bone measurement, which is the circumference just below the horse's knee in the front leg, of 29 centimetres, and all the rest were less than 23 centimetres. But there was no difference in each of those horses' reactions to the heavy and very heavy riders because all the tests were terminated. Now, we were not specifically looking at that as a factor, but you would need to have a specific study to investigate the relationship between bone and weight carrying capacity, but it would suggest that this is probably not a very important factor.
That's really interesting.
It probably is of quite significant importance, the fit of the saddle to the rider and how the saddle positions the rider. Because when we looked at the position of the riders in the saddle, both the light and moderate weight riders were able to sit in the middle of each saddle with space in front of the saddle and behind the saddle, whereas the heavy rider was in 5 of the 6 horses, always sitting right on the back of the saddle, on the cantle area, and for the very heavy rider, her seat actually extended behind the cantle, which obviously is going to influence weight distribution and be influential.
So going from that then, I wonder if we go back to what you said in the beginning about us not having saddles that are made around our body, if the saddle could fit around the body, then the weight would be distributed more evenly, hence not putting down added pressure from the cantle or onto the horse's back.
We think that it is likely that if you could have a saddle that fitted both the horse and the rider, it is possible that a horse may be able to carry a heavier weight than what we saw in this study. However, you would have to test that hypothesis in a specific study. Now, the ability to fit a saddle which is long enough in the seat for all riders will depend upon the length of the horse's back. Because there are going to be some horses, despite the fact that they are maybe even 600 kilograms body weight, will not have a long enough back to accommodate the length required of the saddle for a larger rider. So I think we have to probably accept that there are some horses which are not suitable to be ridden by large riders. We're not saying that large riders shouldn't ride. What we're saying is that large riders should have a horse which is large enough for them and for a saddle which will accommodate them.
So interestingly, your original looking at weight has now taken on another form and extended into it's not just about weight, it's also about how the rider is sat.
Yes, and you mentioned early on the fact that there could be a large rider who sits very, very well and who's perfectly in balance and it actually has a less adverse effect than a lighter weight rider who is less skilled and is moving about in the saddle, who doesn't have a stable lower leg position, who is potentially more deleterious to the horse. There's no doubt about that. So that's why it's very important that we consider this is a multifactorial problem.
But also, it would be great to have some guidelines, because we don't want to see our horses being put in situations or positions that are unfair to them, where we're damaging their backs. And if you have a 13-hand little thoroughbred, no, a larger rider should not be getting on their back, because, this is what I see, Sue, quite frequently actually, is little ponies with taller riders that are ultimately heavier riders. Now, I'm not saying those riders are heavy. I'm saying for that pony, it might, rather than I can't say should, because it's not my job to say should, but possibly the pony could be ridden by an 11-year-old child, and then you see a 10-stone 19-year-old girl get on. Who are we in a position to say that she's too tall or too heavy for that horse? So your guidelines will then be able to help with that, will they?
Well, I don't think we can give absolutely strict guidelines as yet, but I think we can say if it looks right, it probably is okay, and if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't okay. So your 19-year-old on this 13-hand pony is probably not appropriate. To an extent, it's common sense. But we need scientific evidence to help to provide guidelines, and this is the study that we've done is the first step in that direction.
Well, nobody wants to be told, one, that their horse is lame, or that, two, they're too big for their horse, and it's a very difficult subject to approach. So having scientific backing will actually help event organisers handle this in a nice way, without embarrassing, because you don't embarrass people either, do you?
No, you don't want to embarrass people, but I think that people have to be led, they have to be educated, they need to be able to look at themselves in a fairly objective way. They need to not look through rose-tinted spectacles, but they need to look in a mirror from the side, sitting on their horse, and ask the question, am I sitting in the middle of the saddle, or am I on the back of the saddle, or overflowing the back of the saddle? Are my shoulder, hip, and heel in alignment? If they're not, I'm not going to be properly in balance with the horse. So we need to encourage people to educate themselves, to look at themselves in a critical fashion.
You mentioned the length of the rider's leg. What difference does that make to how you sit on the horse?
Well, the shape of the saddle flap will, to an extent, and the shape and the length of the seat will dictate how you sit on the horse. So our heavy rider, for example, was a British Horse Society instructor. He had good balance, but in each saddle he finished up sitting on the cantle with his lower leg too far forward, so that in order to try and maintain his balance in motion, he was having to tip his upper body forwards to accommodate this situation. And that's not easy to do on a continual basis. So if you've got very long legs, you have to adjust the length of the seat of the saddle and the shape of the flaps in order to allow you to sit with your shoulder, hip, and heel in alignment and sitting in the middle of the saddle.
And what about if you have shorter legs? I'm asking because I'm really little.
I think those of us blessed with short legs are actually in a rather fortunate position most of the time. I think it is easier for us to accommodate our position on a bigger variety of horses and saddles.
Unless they're wide. I have a big Frisian. You know Professor Sue, you've met him. And he's got a big wide Frisian. So actually having little legs, sometimes if he's put on a little bit of weight, they only go halfway down his body. So I can never get the lift from putting my legs underneath.
Yes.
Well, I, for one, wish that you would film everything, because I would love to see, and oh my goodness, I could make a TV show out of you. I really could. Filming what you're seeing and describing it as you're seeing it would just be incredible, because now I've got visions of the gentleman instructor riding, and I can picture in my head that he's got long legs and how he's going to be sat. And you're right, with all this education, it's eye-opening, absolutely.
Good,
so where
good.
would you like to go next with this? Where are you going to then take this study?
Well, the plan is next that we do want to go further by looking specifically at the heavy rider category, so the around the 92 kilogram category, looking at a group of riders who vary in height with 4 horses of variable body weight, and we're going to assess them in the owner's saddle, and then in a saddle that, as far as is possible, fits the rider as well as the horse. So assuming we can get funding for this, that is our next plan, but we are absolutely dependent on funding. The current study came about through an initiative through the National Equine Forum and World Horse Welfare, who drew together a meeting of various interested bodies like the British Horse Society, British Showing, and British Eventing, and all of those groups agreed that work needed to be done, and they all put in money for our original study, which was quite unique for the industry to finance a project of this nature. And without similar funding, again, we can't take this further forward. But World Horse Welfare and the Saddle Research Trust have already pledged some funding, so we hope that we'll be able to encourage others to follow that lead.
If I had the money, I'd give it to you, but I don't, I'm afraid. I need to buy my new saddle that fits around my body now. Well, thank you for doing this study. Your study, will your results be published in the Veterinary Journal?
Yes, we have submitted a paper to the Equine Veterinary Journal, and which is an overview of what I've just been talking to you about. There are many other parts of the project, such as we looked at changes in the dimensions of the horse's back underneath the saddle during the 30-minute exercise period, and showed differences between the heavy and the very heavy riders compared with the lighter riders. We looked at various stress measures like cortisol and blink rate. So there are many other aspects of the study that are being prepared for publication as well.
My goodness, when will they be released?
We will present more of the results publicly at the Saddle Research Trust International Conference in December, and we hope by that time that various scientific papers will have been submitted to journals ahead of that time.
Brilliant. Well, I'll be keeping an eye out for that. I'll be the first to grab that link and share it on Horse Hour so that everybody can read that research. And Sue, thank you so much for talking to us today and for talking at the National Equine Forum. If we'd like to follow you and find out more about this study, then we can follow you on Twitter, or we can follow the Animal Health Trust on Twitter. It's at AHTOfficial. And I'm going to go and do some research now into how heavy my horse is and what a diet I need to go on. So thank you, Sue.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can catch all the podcasts from the National Equine Forum on their website. Just head to nationalequineforum.com and you can see them on our website, horsehour.co.uk. I hope you enjoyed the live stream and getting involved in the conversations, asking your questions to the panel and to the speakers just by using #horsehour, #NEF. You'll be able to replay the videos from the forum if you just have a look at their website and their YouTube channel. Now, this event wouldn't be possible without the friends of the forum. Our corporate friends are the Blue Cross, Dodson and Horrell, the Donkey Sanctuary, Hadlow College, New Shule and SEIB Insurance Brokers. Along with individual friends, thank you so much to everybody that takes part in the National Equine Forum and organising it and making sure it's super successful every single year. We'd also like to say thank you to the forum sponsors, BETA, British Equine Veterinary Association, the British Horse Society, Bransby Horses, the Jeffreys Scholarship Trust, Bedmax, HBLB, Red Wings, Weatherbees, the World Horse Welfare, the Horse Trust, BHA, which is the British Horse Racing Authority, the British Equestrian Federation, and our great supporters, Bully Davy, Craig Payne, NFU Mutual, and we're proud to be supporters of the forum too. Really looking forward to next year. Already there's a date set. It will be the 27th National Equine Forum, and it takes place Thursday the 7th of March 2019. I can't believe we're talking about that already. So pop that in your diary, 7th of March next year. So I hope you enjoyed this year's National Equine Forum. I'll speak to you soon.
You've been listening to Horse Hour. Join the community on Twitter, Mondays, 8 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. Eastern by using the hashtag Horse Hour. Follow Amy at Amy Stevenson1 and subscribe to us on Acast, iTunes, Stitcher and Player FM.